Hey guys, welcome back to Show and Go. Today we're going to finish installing the clutch that I finally found my alignment tool from the previous clutch job I did on my Miata. And we're going to bolt on the transmission. As you can see in the back, got the car in that right now it's after 9 o'clock Friday night. And so I'm going to bolt the transmission to the engine today and get the thermostat housing all on there and make some other minor tweaks to the engine bay, and then tomorrow we're going to install this puppy. Get started on aligning this clutch. So when you're installing your clutch, you put your clutch in and then your pressure plate, and there's these alignment dowels that the pressure plate only fits on one way, so you just fit it onto the alignment dowels, and the the bolt holes all line up, and then you'll have your bolt holes just on there loose. And when it's loose, you'll be able to have some free play where you can move the clutch around. And then that's when you'd stick in your alignment dowel, and you make sure that it's seated completely with the bearing and the flywheel, which I've already aligned mine. Yeah, so you make sure it's seated in there, and that's when you tighten down all your bolts that go on the pressure plate. Do a star pattern, so that way you get a even seating onto your clutch and flywheel. Once you have it all lined up and torqued down, then you can pull out your alignment tool. Now that that's done, let's go move on to switching out this thermostat housing. The thermostat housing is held on by two 10mm bolts, and so you just take those off and give it a little tap. It comes off. The gasket on this is built into the thermostat itself. It wasn't leaking before I took the thermostat housing off, but just to be safe, since this is way tight against the firewall, and I won't really be able to get to it once the engine's in the car, I'm just going to put a little bit of silicone gasket maker on the new thermostat housing. The one that you get, I'm impressed with the machining and stuff on it, but it has this bong in there where I think you can put in like a temperature sensor if you wanted for like aftermarket for your ECU, or if you have a gauge or something. I'm just going to stick this plug in it that I got at Ace Hardware. It was in their automotive plug section. To me it looks like an oil plug. It fits in there nice. I'm just going to put some silicone gasket maker on the threads and thread it in there nice and snug. There's two ways you can route the thermostat housing that I've seen. One way is like this, and the downside to this way, in my opinion, is you have to route the coolant line for the upper radiator hose, which is this one, across the side of the engine and then all the way in front of it, because the Miata radiator its upper hose is on the opposite side. So what I'm going to do is route it this way, so that way after it comes around the back and along the side, it's a direct shot into the radiator. I think that looks a lot neater, and it's cheaper because it requires less hose. So something I just realized is I'll have to wait to install my thermostat housing. I'll have to install my transmission first. And the reason being is this little bong ends up hanging too low, where the transmission, in order for it to slide directly in, this needs to not be in the way. So I'll install this after I install the transmission. So I'll show you what you have to do to modify the transmission to bolt to the engine. So here's a quick view of the instructions that Minitech provides. That you have to chop off the top of the transmission, just a little chunk of it. They say 45 degrees, which allows for clearance of the thermostat housing. And right there's a side view that I'm probably going to chop it, this part right here, probably down to right here. And another part that you have to cut is, so you end up marking where the starter hole goes, and you see right there, you can see the little triangle chunk taken out of the transmission. They give you this little piece of metal. It is your template of what you have to cut out. So what I'd recommend is use the adapter plate as the template before you mount it to your engine. I wasn't able to do that, so I traced, if you remember, I traced the template on a piece of cardboard, or I made a template. So I'll just use this and line up the holes, and it'll give me a good enough guesstimate of where the location is, and that should work. So I'll go chop those out. I'm just going to use a grinder, just a cordless DeWalt, and I'll show you how it turned out. So this is what it looks like after I'm done grinding it. I think that should work pretty good. That what I found out is this 60 grit sanding disc worked a lot better than the grinder. The grinder just got clogged up by the aluminum because it's so soft. Definitely went a lot faster with that 60 grit sander. So if you guys do this, use the sander. So now all I have to do is mark and cut out the bottom. So I'll start doing that. So for cutting the hole in the transmission for the starter, to help you understand how the starter goes, sorry, I'm doing this with one hand, and the start's kind of heavy. But it goes in like that. And ends up fitting in there pretty snug. Oops, sorry. If it ends up fitting there pretty snug, it's not really sitting in there yet. And then you have to remember that the starter gets pushed out probably about a 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch to meet up with the gears when you turn it. So took me a little bit to figure out how this template works, so that's why I'm explaining it. So you figure that it'll end up sitting like that. And so it's the shorter, or the smaller space that I'll probably end up cutting out. And I'll show you how the template's supposed to work, I think. So this weird notchy part, that is the complete width of the adapter plate. So you go off of just that triangle part. Before I was like, oh, it goes like that. But nope, just the triangle part. So I'll cut that out. I ended up not showing how I cut it. I just used a Sawzall. And then I'm going to use, so I used a Sawzall on these long parts. And then I'm just going to use my Dremel tool right here. I have air tools that would definitely make it a lot easier and faster, but it's 11 o'clock at night and the air compressor is super loud, and there's an apartment on the other side of the shop I'm in. I'd like to give a huge thanks to Christensen Body Shop. That's where I work. but my manager, my boss, is super nice and lets me work on my car in the shop and use some of his tools. But yeah, so I'll use a Dremel tool, chop that little bit out, and we'll be good to go. Well, good morning, guys. That it is about 8 o'clock. Then I ended up going home because I was tired. But I did change my shirt. So that's what it looks like with it cut out. This is the little piece. And then for the throwout bearing, there is a little sleeve. Let's see if I can get. So there's a little sleeve that the kit provides. Kind of see the silver thing, that's the sleeve. That goes on. I greased both sides. That'll get held in place better once the transmission is held on. And then if you buy the throwout bearing from Minitech, they weld on a little bit of on the tab so that way it fits the fork. Otherwise, if you buy it from like a parts dealer, then you just bend those tabs in a little bit. The instructions explain that off of the Minitech website. Yeah, so throwout bearing's good to go. The next thing you gotta do is on the Miata engine side, there are 2 dowels that go here, and you have to transfer those over to the adapter plate. So that's what I spent this morning getting, was my old engine block. And I am having a pain in the butt to try and get those out. So I sprayed some penetrating oil on there. Hopefully that helps a little bit. And hopefully I don't damage them too badly when I pull them out. So that's what I'm going to be working on, is getting those little guys out. I got the dowels off. What we found was the best way is to heat up the corner of the block, and it expands the metal a little bit and makes it easier for the dowel to slide out. And there they are, installed in the adapter plate. So to get the engine bolted to the transmission, it's best to have a friend. So I have Ethan here. We both went to college together, and he's a great guy, so he's going to help me put this on. I have the transmission bolted on. All the bolts are torqued except for this one right here. This bolt ends up bottoming out on the engine block, so we cut off about 1/4 of an inch. And just make sure that your threads are still clean and it threads in by hand, and you'll be good. Yeah, so this is what it looks like. We just have our engine mounts loosely fitted on, so there's some play. It'll help everything line up once we're installing it in the car. So then now I'll also install the coolant temperature, or the thermostat housing. That's it. So I'll install that. So things that we're finding out is it's kind of a snug fit, and the oil pan definitely doesn't help that it sticks so far out in the front. But it doesn't say in the instructions, but you want to make sure that your sway bar is removed. That goes on top of the oil pan. So we just dropped it for now, so that way we can position the engine in. But it is definitely a tight fit. Yeah, boy! We got the engine in the transmission. That there's probably a lot better ways that you could have done it, but I cut this little section part out so that way there was space for the oil pan to slide through. Since I work at a body shop and fix stuff and weld stuff, it's just as easy for me to weld and repaint it. The paint already was getting chipped off from the oil pan, so it's not going to be that much harder to re-weld that and fix that. But good news, firewall is not damaged. We did mess up the EGR valve, so I may look into doing an EGR delete. There's no emissions in Idaho where I'm at. Also kind of tweaked my heater core hose there, but that's fixable. Clearance wise, it is pretty tight in the back from the thermostat housing. That one thing I forgot to mention is where that black part is. You have to take a hammer and smash that part down. That was painted orange and shiny, but I painted it before I knew I had to smash it. You have to pound that in so that way you have more clearance for that coolant line to go through. It's also pretty close quarters where the alternator is, but there's actually a lot of space in the front of the engine, so you could definitely twin turbo this beast. That might happen down the road, but need a stronger transmission. And just bolted the sway bar back on. That you do have to swing that, pretty much remove that. And I just had to put the PPF on in the back. But it's coming together. So happy to have the engine in with the trans. It looks beautiful. Here's the view of the underside. That the oil pan does stick down fairly low. That a lot of people I've talked to that have done this swap, they like to run a piece of steel, like a steel plate, underneath it as protection. So I'll probably be doing that. And then I'm also going to have a front splitter. I'm also going to make a plate to cover that transmission hole, and the starter bolts in right there. The one bolt for the starter is provided. The other one, none of the bolts that were on the Miata fit through it, so I'm just going to go to Ace Hardware and get a 3.5-inch long bolt that fits in that hole. Everything lined up beautifully. Just have to put the drive shaft on. It's going to be fun to figure out how to run the exhaust though, but I'll save that for another day. As you can tell up there, it's not too much space. If you have the 90s engine, there's a little bit more space that they give you a header that will fit in between the steering. Well, that's all we got for today. So, thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe.